Jonathan Taylor is losing dynasty value. What are we doing with him? We're talking all that and more on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is former NFL scout Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, we're kind of going back to an oldie but goodie here. We're talking Dynasty ADP today. We've got some brand new data from Dynasty League football, and there's a few surprises here, Matt. So we're going to dig right in if you're ready.
I am. Let's dig in heavy here. I mean, there's calm, a little bit of the calm before the storm. Camp's right around the corner, but getting a real feel for these. And I actually started putting my first redraft list together this morning. So really getting into fantasy for this upcoming year more than usual, or earlier than usual, I would say.
All right, let's do it. So no real surprises at the top. Justin Jefferson is still your 101. Jamar Chase is 102. Bijan Robinson is 103, the rookie running back. Also makes him, of course, the RB1 overall. And then I think we're looking at what's pretty clearly a teardrop, and maybe actually the drop happens after Chase. But our next few guys, some wide receivers here. CeeDee Lamb is 4th. A.J. Brown, 5. Garrett Wilson, 6. Jalen Waddle, 7. And Amon-Ra St. Brown is 8. Matt, if I told you that one of those guys will not be a first rounder this time next year, maybe wouldn't even be a second rounder this time next year, who would you pick?
St. Brown, and not just because he's last. And I'm not particularly worried about him. I think he's a great player. And, you know, you could say the same about Cooper Kupp. But it worries me a little in Detroit that, first of all, their offense isn't going to sneak up on anybody this year. But more so from his perspective, it worries me, and this is where I brought up Cooper Kupp, that he's kind of the only show in town on the pass-catching front there. I mean, these other guys can deflect a little bit more attention away, and he might be the least talented of the group. I mean, we're splitting hairs here, though, of course.
Yeah, we certainly are, and it's hard to see any of this group, Lamb, A.J. Brown, Wilson Waddle, or St. Brown, hard to see any of them falling. I think if I had to pick one, I think I'm going Jalen Waddle. There's obviously still questions about the health of Tua Tagovailoa. Waddle does have Tyreek Hill there. Obviously, some questions about him right now as well. Waddle just simply hasn't been as productive as some of these other players that he's being valued around. So if you told me one of those 5 is a second rounder next year, maybe even later than that, Waddle would be the guy I would go with. Let's finish out the
quick question for
round.
you.
Sure.
Would Garrett Wilson be your choice if I told you this time next year one of them is in the tier 1 receiver group?
Yeah,
me too.
It would be Garrett Wilson. Yeah, if you say one of those 5 is up there with Jefferson and Chase, Garrett Wilson would be my choice there.
I agree.
We had a wide receiver run. Now we have a little mini running back run. 1.09 is Christian McCaffrey. 1.10 Jonathan Taylor, and 1.11 is Breece Hall. Really interesting trio here. And I mentioned Jonathan Taylor at the top of the show. He is still a first rounder, but as I said, he's pretty clearly losing value. He is no longer a top 2 running back. We've got Bijan Robinson as the RB1. Seems like few really are questioning that at this point. RB2, though, is Christian McCaffrey, the veteran, the old guy, you know, kind of air quotes there because he's obviously not that old, but compared to some of these others, looks like it. McCaffrey's back in that RB2 spot, and then Taylor at RB3 and 10 overall. And I think comparing McCaffrey and Taylor is really interesting right now. If I've got a contending team, I think I'd rather have Christian McCaffrey than Jonathan Taylor. And we have to start asking ourselves, is Taylor that elite talent that we want to bank on for the next 3 to 4 years?
I have real mixed feelings on Taylor because, like, when the draft ended and Richardson went there and that all fell into place, I just kind of thought, man, this team's going to run for 250 yards a game, and even though he's sharing, so what, Nelson behind, or, Taylor behind Nelson with teams keying on Richardson, this guy is going to go crazy, and he's a phenomenal prospect. Missed a little bit of time last year, but has been unbelievably durable before that. But there are two flags that really worry me with him is Richardson stealing goal line touches or touchdowns in general. I mean, short touchdowns, as Allen often does in Buffalo. And if you really dig into Richardson as a prospect, very, very rarely threw to running backs. And that's not all that uncommon amongst great, running quarterbacks, because why would I dump it to this guy when I can just take off, So I got to think Taylor's receptions are a little worrisome as well.
Well, and that's an area that we were already somewhat concerned about. He has, there's been some improvement through his career in that area, but certainly not a guy that we count on for huge numbers from a PPR standpoint. So you're right. If Richardson is further damaging that upside, that becomes a concern. I've had Jonathan Taylor as my RB3 for a while now. I have both Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall ranked ahead of him.
Okay. Not McCaffrey though.
I don't currently have McCaffrey, but as I said, I've really been kind of mentally comparing these two guys recently quite a bit. And I think that may have to change. I mean, just frame it this way, over the next 2 years, who do you want?
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I hate that the Jets supposedly are flirting with Dalvin Cook. I mean, that isn't a ringing endorsement for Hall's health, but his injury, I think, was like in October. I mean, I don't know that it'll be as looming as some of these other guys, So I hear what you're saying about all these backs. They're a little volatile.
Well, I mean, it got dismissed a little bit and just swept under the rug almost. But the Jets flirted with Jahmyr Gibbs reportedly as well.
Right.
We're considering drafting him before the Lions did. They did draft one of those guys that we like in the later rounds, Izzy Abanikanda. They still have Michael Carter. They still have Zonovan Knight. We've got to start trusting what we're being told when it comes to Breece Hall. And I do think, though, that is more of a short-term concern rather than a long-term, but
true.
Yeah. So we've got McCaffrey, Taylor, and Hall here late in round one. Round one ends with one of my favorites, Chris Olave. Personally, I think he's actually undervalued at the 12
I was
spot.
about to say the same thing. Yeah.
I would have him up in that same group of those 5 wide receivers we mentioned earlier, Lamb, Brown, Wilson, Waddle, and St. Brown. And I would take him over all 3 of the running backs that we just mentioned. So I really like the value that Chris Olave offers late in round one.
Yeah, you kind of beat me to it, but I was going to say I would take Olave over Waddle or St. Brown, and certainly all 3 of those running backs.
I did also mean to say on Taylor, nearly forgot this. You said you kind of had mixed feelings about him. Our drafters have mixed feelings about him as well, because we have 6 drafts worth of data here for this month. He went 6 overall in one of those drafts. He went 8 overall in 2 of those drafts. In the other 3, he went 14, 16, and 20 overall. And again, these are all 1 quarterback drafts that we're talking about. So falling to 20th overall spot in a single quarterback mock draft is what happened with Jonathan Taylor, and how he ends up with an ADP here in the late part of round 1.
Interesting.
Matt, when we come back, we'll talk about the players that make up round 2, the values, the overranked, the underranked, and more.
Guys, we have a really exciting new sponsor here at the Locked On Network, eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with the Locked On Fantasy Football host, Vinny Iyer, who does great work, to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, and they're going to do it all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, Every week, we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny's picked out for us this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And I'm very much behind this one. I mean, Vinny picked out Austin Eckler, and I absolutely condone it. I think the Chargers are going to get a real spike on offense, offensive coordinator change. Herbert was injured for a lot of the year, and Eckler's been phenomenal. So which running back has scored the most TDs combined over the past 2 seasons? Yeah, that's the electric Chargers running back, Austin Eckler, who's 38 scores since 2021 and featured receiving first role, makes him a guaranteed fit for the first overall pick in the 2023 fantasy football drafts. Eckler will see his usual high leverage work as a runner and remain the focal point of the short passing game. So I have no problems whatsoever with Eckler, and I am 100% on board there as well. So Vinny Iyer, as mentioned, from Locked On Fantasy Football, is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. The same is true for your vehicle. So with eBay Guaranteed Fit, over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, so much more. You name it. eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a single click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. That's ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, and exclusions do apply. Thanks.
We are giving you a sneak peek of DLF Dynasty ADP for the month of July that is not on dynastyleaguefootball.com quite yet. It will be soon, but that's why you're checking in, giving you that early look. We talked about round 1 earlier to begin the show. Let's look at round 2. And Matt, at the top of this list, I think this is a great story. I don't know if I'm totally on board with the pick this high, but I do love to see it. Cooper Kupp, 2.01. We know he missed so much time last year with the injury, and his value fell, drastically, honestly, down to the 5th or 6th round in our startup ADP. Here he is back in that wide receiver 1 range, back at the top of the 2nd round. As I said, this is probably a little too early, even for me as a Kupp supporter. Mm-hmm. What are you doing with Cooper Kupp, and would you be willing to spend a 2nd rounder on it?
Not the first 2nd rounder. I mean, I thought that was a little early for a 30-year-old. He has proven, I just kind of mentioned him haphazardly when we talked about St. Brown, that he can be the only trick in town and still get open, generate, time from the slot all over. But he's 30, and I really worry about Stafford more than I worry about Kupp. I know that in redraft, he's going extremely high, 2nd receiver off the board. I understand that. And I've heard a lot of the fantasy pundits that I listen to a podcast saying there's almost no downside to Kupp if he's on the field, because he's going to get unbelievable amount of targets. The defense in LA is going to be horrendous. They're going to be coming from behind all the time, throwing like crazy. And what's his face? Their head coach, when they're losing, they don't run the big bang. Yeah, when they're losing, they don't run the ball. And where do you think it's going to go? I get all that. It's just he's a 30-year-old receiver.
Yeah, love the player. Still love the situation, even though the Rams are down, as you hinted at there. But can't spend the 2.01 on him. Mm-hmm. The end of the 2nd round, that's where I would be considering or starting to consider Cooper Kupp. But again, kind of a guy I've been cheering for, and really do expect him to make a great comeback this year. The 2.02 is an interesting conversation as well because it's a quarterback. Again, this is one quarterback ADP data, but we've got Patrick Mahomes at the 2.02, 14 overall. And spoiler alert here, you won't hear another quarterback's name in this second round. So this conversation or this question is not so much should you take a quarterback in round 2, but is Patrick Mahomes a full round better than Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen? Both of those guys, interestingly enough, have the exact same ADP, which puts them in the early third round range. Here we've got Mahomes in the early second. So do you see that type of gap between Mahomes and the other two?
I don't. I think if we're talking about Hall of Fame cases or in the all-time pecking order of quarterbacks, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about, no, because not like Allen or Hurts is getting benched or getting old or anything like that. They're every bit the fantasy producer on a per-game basis that Mahomes is. They're going to have the longevity. They have the supporting cast. They have the contracts to back it up. I think the three of them are exactly the same.
Yeah, I do as well. Certainly glad to have Mahomes, but just based on where we see the other quarterbacks land, he feels a little overvalued on this list. Let's roll through a few of these other guys here. 2.03, another rookie, Jahmyr Gibbs. 2.04 is T. Higgins. 2.05 is Tyreek Hill. You know, we talked about Hill last month, I believe, and in our June data, he actually snuck into the first round. I was shocked to see that. Honestly, I said I don't think that's really representative of where his value is in Dynasty. And then, of course, not long after that, we heard about the off-field incident that is now, I believe, being investigated. So once again, I'm surprised to see Tyreek Hill still this high on this list as an early as a mid-second rounder. You know, he's above Stephon Diggs. He's above Devontae Adams, the other wide receivers that he gets grouped with so often. And given this latest incident and the uncertainty around what might happen with that, I can't believe he's 2.05, honestly.
Well, I guess it could be a short conversation or a really long conversation. Is we ended the first segment saying, man, if I could get Olave with the 12th overall pick, I'm doing cartwheels. That'd be great. And I think we both agree on that. Yeah. But then we start segment number 2 going, Kupp's too high at 2.1. Mahomes is too high at 2.2. I'm sitting in the back of my head going, I don't know if I can use 2.3 on Gibbs without ever seeing him play. Is Higgins special enough to be 2.4 and then Hill's 2.5 that we just brought up?
Yeah, so who is it? That's the question. Who is it?
Exactly. Right. So I don't want to pick 2.1, you know?
Well, we talked yesterday about, you know, how important we talked yesterday with Clay about how important tiering is. If you're talking about a startup draft, know those tiers. He mentioned kind of one of their strategies on their show is get back into that first round to get a second pick. This is why we see these large drops in tiers, large gaps from one tier to the next, and you get to the 13th, 14th, 15th pick, and they all kind of look the same, and you wish you had traded up or traded down. I think you can make a case to go either direction. Just don't get stuck there in the middle. So good call on Tyreek Hill. That's maybe why we're seeing him here. Is who else are you going to take?
And real quick, the next name on the list is Devontae Smith. So between Higgins and Smith, they're the second receiver on their team already. You know, nothing against the players, but they're number 2s on their team. And I'm using the second pick in the startup on them. You know, like it's a rough neighborhood here is the point.
Well, Tyreek Hill is the second wide receiver drafted from his team as well on this list. Right. I think obviously most people would think of Tyreek as the wide receiver 1 for the Dolphins, but from a dynasty standpoint, all three of these guys, Higgins, Hill, and Smith, saw teammates drafted in the first round. We are going to reveal the rest of the second round. We'll talk about those guys, including a couple of interesting running backs, and we'll do that next. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Everydayers, check back tomorrow. Kate and Marcus will be back to finish up the week with some great Dynasty information for you. So check out that show, and we always appreciate you listening in. Matt, we're talking DLF Dynasty ADP for the month of July. We've looked at round 1. We've looked at the first half of round 2. That was Cooper Kupp, Patrick Mahomes, Jahmyr Gibbs, T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, and Devontae Smith. Let's talk about the rest of round 2. You kind of made the point of who are you taking? Who do you feel good about at 2.01? This is a big tier here. I want to start with these 2 running backs. Both of them are, kind of at a turning point in their career, I guess you could say, a crossroads.
Maybe their last year with these teams.
Right. Saquon Barkley, 2.07. I guess technically he's holding out right now, or about to hold out at least, because he has not signed that franchise tag tender. And then right behind him is Austin Eckler, the name we talked about earlier. Eckler is going to be with his team, the Chargers, again, after some uncertainty about that. But as you said, this could be it. This could be the final year in LA for Austin Eckler. For me, it's not even a player specific issue at this point. I'm just avoiding running backs in this range.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. Like, I think I'd rather have a Nick Chubb or a Josh Jacobs or Ramondre Stevenson, later on, Kenneth Walker, those type of dudes, even a Najee Harris at a discounted price compared to this neighborhood for these backs.
So far we feel like pretty much the entire second round is being overvalued. That's a bad sign. Let's finish it up here with the last 4 guys. They are all pass catchers. DK Metcalf, 2.09. Stephon Diggs, 2.10. Drake London, 2.11. And the veteran Travis Kelce, 2.12. Still hanging around in the second round despite being nearly 34 years old. I'm not taking Travis Kelce that high, Matt. You? Are you taking that guaranteed production? Not enough, huh?
I mean, I guess you could have a build where you're like McCaffrey, Kupp, Kelce, you know what I mean? And just live for today. That's not what I want to do, though. It'd be really hard to beat this year. The one name I would throw out, though, is just considering how, I don't say soft, but questionable the second round is. I think I'll take Stephon Diggs that late. I don't think he's much different than Kupp to me.
Yeah, I don't think so at all.
Yeah.
The name I wanted to ask you about, and it's interesting that they're right beside each other, Drake London and Travis Kelce. Kelce is the old guy that we expect elite production from in 2023. I don't think certainly wouldn't be a surprise if he was the tight end 1 again. And Drake London, still only 21 years old. Lots of questions about that offense, about how much they're going to pass the ball, and really what London's role is. But dynasty managers are, really infatuated with London's ability and his upside, and his age doesn't hurt at all. So seeing these 2 stark contrast right beside each other with the last 2 picks in the second round is interesting. I just think Drake London is overvalued, not because anything about him, but I think the wide receiver position is so deep, and we're not going to get to the third round today, but seeing some of these names that are in the third round, Treylon Burks is actually in the fourth round. I think I'd rather have Treylon Burks a round plus later versus Drake London. What are you doing with London right now?
The fact that Devontae Adams isn't in this second round is a little disheartening to me. In terms of some of the older guys that are. Right. Couple notes on London, and I think he's a tremendous football player. I really, really like his the player. I don't think his situations is as dire as people think, because there's a couple things. Is his targets? I know Pitts was out, but his targets when Ritter were in there were high, and teams that run a lot of RPOs also throw to 1 or 2 receivers a high percentage of the time. And Atlanta's one of the highest RPO teams in the league. Basically, it's should I run it or should I throw it to my best guy? And London's been the beneficiary of that a lot. And I understand Coach Smith is a run-heavy dude, and everyone thinks about Tannehill and Henry and last year. But if you look at his history as a play caller, and it goes back, 5 or 6 years or whatever, as long as Marcus Mariota isn't his quarterback, it's not so lopsided as people think.
All right. You made me feel a little better. About Drake London. And again, the upside, the age, these are all things that we are chasing. That's what has pushed him into this second round range.
And what if they get a quarterback in the offseason? What if Kirk Cousins goes there or something? Like now he's an early second round pick.
Right. So round 2, let's recap. It was Cooper Kupp, Patrick Mahomes, Jahmyr Gibbs, T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, DK Metcalf, Stephon Diggs, Drake London, and Travis Kelce. That is your top 2 rounds from our DLF Dynasty ADP from the month of July. Lots of interesting players, obviously, in that range. That is going to do it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Matt at Williamson NFL, and I'm Ryan, MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.